Welcome to the Country Watch Political Intelligence Briefing Quick Hits, a weekly briefing of hot stories across the world in brief. I'm Denise Youngblood-Coleman, the Chief Editorial Officer and Senior International Affairs Analyst at Country Watch. There's a lot going on in the world, but I'm going to begin with the United Kingdom, where Prime Minister Boris Johnson was forced to announce that he was stepping down from power, setting the path for a leadership contest within the Conservative Tory party. Going back to June 2022, Prime Minister Johnson barely survived a confidence vote brought over violations he committed during COVID lockdown. Then, in late June 2022, the Tories lost two by-elections in Wakefield and Honiton Tiverton, respectively, with those seats going to Labour and the Liberal Democrats, respectively. After that came the Pincher scandal, when it was revealed that the Prime Minister appointed Chris Pincher to a government role even after knowing of allegations of sexual misconduct. This Pincher scandal appeared to be the last straw of sorts and resulted in the resignations of two key members of Prime Minister Johnson's cabinet, Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rishi Sunak, and the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care, Sajid Javid. At issue for both Sunak and Javid were frustrations over having to weather reputational damage to the government over back-to-back scandals. The resignations of Sunak and Javid had a domino effect, with several Tory officials resigning one after the other in a mass exodus of the administration of Boris Johnson. For all of them, the issue was the same: loss of confidence in the Prime Minister over perceived poor judgment. Meanwhile, Labour leader Keir Starmer smelled proverbial blood in the water and urged other cabinet ministers to resign. He condemned those remaining in government, casting them as, and I quote, nodding dogs. But Starmer also had harsh words for those who had tendered their resignations, saying that they had been complicit every step of the way as the Prime Minister disgraced his office and let down his country. For his part, Boris Johnson remained not just undeterred, but defiant, despite hemorrhaging political support from within his own party. He insisted he retained a mandate from the results of the last election, but it was clear that his position was untenable. And on July 7, 2022, Johnson held a press conference outside 10 Downing Street, reaffirmed his mandate, but also said he would step down once a new leader of the Conservative Party had been chosen. Johnson's reasoning in remaining at 10 Downing Street while the leadership contest was ongoing remained dubious. The official line from within the Johnson cadre was that he wanted to keep the government stable as it went through a difficult phase of transition at the top echelon of governance. According to a report from the Mirror, however, Johnson wanted to stay on as Prime Minister, even in a caretaker capacity, because he and his wife intended to throw a lavish wedding reception at Chequers, the country residence of the Prime Minister. Meanwhile, the contest for the leadership of the Conservative Party was underway. Several former and current members of the cabinet put their proverbial hats in the ring, including Attorney General Suella Braverman, former Health Secretary Sajid Javid, former Health Secretary Jeremy Hunt, former Brexit Secretary Steve Breaker, Transport Secretary Grant Shapps, Chancellor Nadhim Zahawi, and Foreign Secretary Liz Truss. But bookies had their eyes on former Chancellor Rishi Sunak as the strongest contender among the bunch once he entered the race. It was not lost on the Johnson inner circle that Sunak was immediately ready to enter the leadership race with a campaign video and a slogan called Ready for Rishi, which several senior Conservative members of Parliament endorsed. The Johnson inner circle was reportedly viewing Sunak's actions as clear disloyalty. Despite being the de facto favourite of the new field, Sunak was not without his own political hurdles. At issue was his wife's tax status and his family's wealth at the time when the British people were suffering a cost of living crisis. Regardless, the chair of the 1922 committee, Sir Graham Brady, was scheduled to meet on July 11, 2022 to decide on the timetable and structure of the Conservative Party's leadership contest. In Japan, that country was reeling from the shocking assassination of former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. World leaders were reacting in horror at the assassination of a statesman, and in a country where violence has been rare. Shinzo Abe was Japan's longest-serving prime minister, who led his Liberal Democratic Party, the LDP, to victory at the polls. He gained notoriety for his hawkish and nationalistic foreign policy, as well as his signature economic strategy that came to be known as Abenomics. Under Abe's leadership, Japan was to be transposed from a post-war pacifist nation into one with the military fortitude to defend itself. His nationalist gestures, such as his 2013 visit to Tokyo's Yasukuni Yasukuni Shrine have raised tensions with China and South Korea. Meanwhile, under Abenomics, Japan's economy was revived from deflation while also implementing strict fiscal discipline. There was also the death of Jose Eduardo dos Santos, the former president of Angola, who died at a clinic in Barcelona, Spain. Dos Santos was one of Africa's longest-serving rulers, having held the post of president of Angola for 4 decades. In 1979, Jose Eduardo dos Santos assumed the leadership of the Popular Movement for the Liberation of Angola, also known as the MPLA, a Marxist socialist movement which was backed by the Soviet Union, Cuba, for many years. A democratic system of government was established in Angola in 2008, but Dos Santos and the MPLA remained the most powerful force on the political field. Despite the Marxist roots of the MPLA, Dos Santos adapted to the changing landscape and was behind the development of Angola's oil industry, guiding the country to becoming sub-Saharan Africa's second largest oil producer after Nigeria. Yet despite the oil wealth, Angola remained one of the poorest and most corrupt countries in the world. Since stepping down from office in 2017, Dos Santos has resided in Spain, where he was undergoing treatment until his death. In Sudan, months after the military coup that deposed the transitional pro-democracy government, an active resistance was still ongoing. The military junta from day one has had trouble garnering public support from a country eager to finally see the spoils of democracy. By the end of June 2022, the coup leadership and the security forces it controlled were continuing its hardline and violent crackdown against demonstrators. In fact, it was the only way it could hold on to power. By July 2022, Sudan's coup leader, Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, said he would step away and give way to civilian power. This announcement was met with skepticism, however, which only increased when it was reported that the military junta would maintain control over Sudan's central bank and foreign policy. The conclusion was that the military and security forces it controlled had no actual intention of relinquishing power. Instead, this offer to cede civilian administration was quite likely an attempt to lessen the effects of a mounting civil disobedience campaign that was growing more passionate with every civilian killing incident. Finally, I'd like to discuss Sri Lanka, which has been rocked by an economic crisis that is now driving the leadership of the country from power. I'm going to focus on Sri Lanka in much more detail in forthcoming editions, but I'd like to cover the main high points for now. On July 9th, the world was struck by images coming out of Sri Lanka showing protesters en masse swarming the presidential palace and forcing President Gotabaya Rajapaksa to flee and take refuge on a naval ship. The reality was that Sri Lanka was in an economic crisis, the country was bankrupt, and the blame could be placed at least partially on the manifold mismanagement by President Gotabaya Rajapaksa and his brother, former Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa, who had been forced to step down months earlier. Sri Lanka's economic disaster has deep roots. The country has for a long time borrowed too much and taxed too little, but the Rajapaksa dynasty made it worse. They took out loans from China as part of that country's Belt and Road Initiative. That placed China in a place of vulnerability to Beijing if they defaulted on debt payments. And that's just what happened in the case of the Hambantota port project, which Sri Lanka was forced to turn over to Beijing's control when it could not pay the loans. Meanwhile, under the presidency of Gotabaya Rajapaksa, taxes were slashed despite increasing foreign debt and dwindling foreign currency reserves, essentially mitigating the government from being able to purchase foreign currency reserves. In a failed bid to save the country's foreign currency reserves, a ban on imported chemical fertilizers was implemented in 2021. All that accomplished was damage to the agricultural sector. By July 2022, a team from the IMF had been in Sri Lanka to discuss a financial assistance program. The visit ended without reaching an agreement. It was doubtful that a program will ever even be finalized before August. So, as the world views the unreal sight of a swarm of humanity converging upon the luxurious presidential palace, the president fleeing for his life, and the contrast with the opulence of his home, as compared with the struggle of everyday Sri Lankans, the vista should be viewed as a cautionary tale. I will continue to cover the Sri Lankan story, including the fact that President Rajapaksa boarded the naval vessel with suitcases. Perhaps the Sri Lankan people would like to know what was in those suitcases. Subscribers can read more about these and other stories at the Country Watch website at www.countrywatch.com. I'd also like to take this time to mention my comprehensive Afghanistan withdrawal report called Sunset in the Graveyard of Empires, which is available for purchase at Amazon.com. Thank you for your time. Have a great day, and remember now, more than ever, we live in an interconnected world.